Okay, thank you everyone for joining our third 2026 Unizin webinar. This will be on data-informed advising with our colleagues here from UC Irvine. Before I hand it over to Ray and Heather, just for folks that might not be know all the ins and outs of Unizin and what we do, I just want to take a few minutes and go over at a high level what the consortium is all about here at Unizin. So we are a nonprofit consortium. We were formed in 2014 by Indiana University, the University of Florida, the University of Michigan, and Colorado State University. We're now at 16 members and growing, with recent additions of New York University and the University of Illinois. The consortium was created back in 2014 to try and answer or respond to two questions that both have an ed tech focus. The first is, how do we reduce duplication of effort, specifically around things like ed tech procurement, as well as data management around education technology solution providers? So that's question one. Question two is also, how do we take innovation that happens locally at one member institution and then scale that out to the rest of the membership? So those were the two questions the founders of Unizin were really wrestling with back in 2014. Over the years, those two questions have evolved into what we consider Unizin's four primary value streams. The first is around advantageous contracts with edtech solution providers. Our membership, although we're 16 members, our members make up almost 1 million students. I think it's a little over 900,000 students right now. We try and use that to the best of our ability to negotiate good price points with different edtech solution providers out there. So we currently have 14 providers in our partner program. Most of those have good pricing, but maybe an equally important part of these partnerships is all of these folks agree to share data with our members through the Unizin Data Platform. So we now have data from Canvas, Brightspace, TopHack, Kaltura, VitalSource, PackBack, and several other large edtech providers. So we always try and bring that together for our members too, inside of our second value stream, which is the Unizin Data Platform. So the Unizin Data Platform, we'll probably hear a little bit more about that here shortly. That brings together data from a student information system, a learning management system, and a growing number of edtech tools. The data platform has two, I'll call them flavors of data. There's contextual data, which is typically slow-moving data. The SIS is predominantly contextual data. But then we also have an event stream. So that's all the clicks that are created when students navigate these different learning environments. Just to give a sense of scale, in 2025, we saw somewhere just north of 16 billion clickstream events across the consortium. That averages out to about 500 events a second coming into the infrastructure. So we have lots and lots of event data there next to the contextual data. The third value stream is what we call Engage. This is a digital content program that uses the inclusive access model. So what this allows is students to have access to their digital textbooks and courseware on or before the first day of class at, again, negotiated price points with our solution providers. We estimate last year we saved students almost $20 million in courseware costs. So very happy to also support affordability and try and help in that aspect of the student's educational journey across our member institutions. And finally, we have teaching and learning communities. We have 7 of them. So these are where people from specific roles across the consortium come together to share best practices, share demonstrations of tools that they're either building or procuring, and those kinds of things. You can think of folks in roles of faculty development, accessibility, learning analytics, application development, and a few others. So before I hand it over to Ray and Heather, just a little bit on why we're really focusing this year's webinars around advising. In mid-2024, we did an inventory across the consortium and reached out to a lot of the folks that use our data platform and asked them, who are you trying to deliver data to? What personas are you trying to serve with data that comes out of the Unizin Data Platform? So in 2024, we found 19, I'll call them applications, but they're everything from applications to Tableau dashboards and different kinds of things that leverage UDP data to deliver that data to different folks. So we found 19 applications, almost an even split between advising and faculty, and then you see a significant drop off before you get to some of those other personas. We revisited this in late 2025. We found 3 more things that were all in the advising space. So this seems to be a space that's really growing across Unizin in terms of delivering data, specifically data that often gets created as students engage the LMS, to advisors and different kind of use cases. And what we're going to hear about today is one of those new things we discovered in that most recent inventory in late 2025. So with that, I'd like to introduce Ray Vadnais. He is the lead product and UX strategist in the Office of Information Technology at the University of California, Irvine, as well as Heather Cartagena. I hope I got that right. I was practicing when Heather got on a little earlier here with me. She's the Executive Director of Academic Advising in the Office of the Vice Provost for Teaching and Learning at UC Irvine. So I will stop my share now and turn it over to you.
Thanks. I really should have updated my photo before y'all grabbed it off my LinkedIn profile. Heather, did you want to start us off?
Certainly. Well, thanks for the introduction, Bart, and for the context of Unizin. And I'm sure everybody here is familiar with Unizin, but maybe not as obvious of its applications or the benefits to academic advising. So Ray and I are here to tell you about some work that we've been doing on our campus, and particularly a platform that we've just launched called AnteaterAdvising. So to set some context here, I'm going to tell you a little bit about advising on our campus. So we have, like most research universities, a highly decentralized system. Right now, I have 15 different academic advising offices that I'm working with. That includes 13 of our academic schools and 2 other advising programs for honors and undeclared students. This is intentionally, this isn't intentionally how we were designed. This is just kind of how we've grown up. So our institution is a bit young. We're about 60 years old. We just turned 60 this year, actually. And so these schools have just done their own thing and evolved and matured independently, and their advising offices along with that. But as we have grown, and we did have a very big growth spurt about 15 years ago, we went from 20,000 students to 30,000 students due to a state mandate. There's just more eligible college, UC eligible students in California than there were seats available in the system. So all of our campuses have had to go through some growing pains, and we already grew our 10,000 students between 2010 and 2020. But we're starting to see ourselves as, a little more interconnected. And right now, everything is really, siloed like it is in a lot of research universities. So what worked at that scale isn't kind of working anymore. And we've spent the last 5 to 10 years trying to arrive at like how to support this new size, how to support our advisors and our students, because there is this interdisciplinary shift. So you're not just owning one student for the time and they're on a kind of a single track and it's a small little cohort. We now have tens of thousands of students, and their curricular complexity is part of it, right? And they're having these interdisciplinary pathways where they're double majoring, they're minoring, they're changing their major a lot for sure. So you need to have better sort of systems and policies in place across our different units. So advisors need a complete picture of who the whole student is, not just what their unit is doing. So we kind of need to see what's happening in other classes and other programs, et cetera. So the other real problem that we have on our campus, which I'm sure isn't new, is that we have legacy systems, and it's the being polite. We have a legacy sys. We have been talking for a long time about replacing it, but as many other, I spent a long time at another university and they still haven't replaced their sys either. So these are complex issues. And so you're looking for solutions that can kind of deal with your legacy systems. Our advising units growing up separately and kind of doing their own thing also developed very different levels of technical capacity. So some had developed their own tools. These are also aging now, and like people that were supporting them in-house are retiring and things like this. But most are relying on spreadsheets, manual processes, looking up students one by one. And so this does create a little bit of haves and have-nots on our campus in the past. So we are looking to kind of solve a lot of these issues while also launching some initiatives and changing some policies and procedures along the way as well. So how are we envisioning our advising moving forward, well, we are trying to become more consistent. That is my buzzword. Bart mentioned I'm the executive director of advising here on campus, and I'm in a provost arm of the university, which is the first time we've had this kind of oversight over advising functions, is with my position. But we started to intentionally look through like data equity, like who has access and who doesn't. And rather than trying to meet separate bespoke reporting and analytics needs, which is kind of what we were doing before, trying to make sure that everyone is working from the same curated source of truth. Like what is the data? What is this value in, what does it mean to be an international student? What does it mean to be a first year versus a freshman class standing? These kinds of things. It improves the consistency for our students, certainly, because we're using kind of common understanding of what we're talking about, but every advisor really should have access to the same trusted information, regardless of their school or their local resources, because that's the environment that we were building in. So we are trying to create a more supportive process for both advisors and students, and different advisors could try to answer the same question with very different levels of effort. So some of them might have key information available in some local homegrown system. Somebody else is like manually looking up students and logging it in a spreadsheet. And some other advisors are like, I don't even know where to look for this. Like, where is it? I don't even know what the question is to ask, right? So during the same time frame, we were also redefining our approach to academic notice, which the UC system has 2 years ago scrubbed the word probation from all of our rules and regulations. That was a separate side quest of mine. I never thought that I would get the words changed in the regulations for the entire system, but we had some groundswell with our colleagues on our other campuses, and we pitched it to our academic senate system-wide, and they agreed. So we no longer call academic probation on our campus. It's called academic notice. But we found that having this policy change, it was only going to work if advisors had tools to make the new practices feasible. And so we had started doing that. And this is a multi-year process. We've been doing it in several different phases, like what is academic notice? What are the terms? And now we're actually working on what the disqualification or readmission process is. So trying to have a philosophy that's more supportive, but the technology wasn't driving the policy. It was the policy was helping to define what this technology needed to support. And we are trying to get away from punitive measures to supporting the student success in that category. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. And just institutionalizing best practice. So over the years, our individual advisors and their advising units had really they've had to create workarounds. They are consumers of data, but they don't own any of our systems on campus. And so they're creating shadow databases. They're using manual spreadsheets and other tracking systems. They have their own little homegrown solutions that's just for that one school. And they're filling the gaps. But these weren't connected. They didn't scale. They were really just born out of necessity to reflect our advising functions and our needs. So each report that they kind of created on their own was valuable, but we advise students. I don't advise a report. And rather than asking all 15 of my advising units to solve these problems independently, or here's some version of something. You can each have your own version of this tool. It's just not sustainable. We couldn't maintain that kind of thing. We had started kind of in that direction, but we wanted to create the capabilities advisors actually need, but at the institutional level. So this means advisors can have their own source of truth and work individually with students and not spend more time looking for data. They can spend more time advising students. So one of the key ways that we have done this is through our Compass project. The Compass project was started several years ago by Ray, actually, to give advisors access to data and information that they needed for a handful of critical intervention points, some progress indicators and things like that. But alongside this, we were also developing a comprehensive student data warehouse. Along the way, we joined the Unizin project. So now we have a lot of data in order to develop better analytical tools for our advisors and other administrators. So we ended up, though, in our Compass project, as it's evolved, we ended up with kind of a large ecosystem of data analytics. Lots of different people were contributing tools. For advisors, that was a little frustrating because then I had to remember who built the tool that has the data that I need in this moment. And so that was, each report was tracking something. And then I was like, okay, I had to which one am I going to? Where is that again? We had multiple sources of reports and analytics and in multiple systems too. So we had some Tableau things. We have some SharePoint dropped static reports. We have some Cognos reports, some Power BI stuff. So we had a different ecosystem, but it was still frustrating for our users to try to go and figure out where is the information that I need. None of the reports also really allowed for a deep dive into an individual student's progress, and advisors need both. So I need reports to identify students that need some kind of targeted intervention, but then I need to be able to really work with that individual student and understand what's going on with their progress and what decisions or intervention do we need to implement. So in the most recent phase of this project, we have now created Compass Insights is the arm of this project that's really for advisors and some of the academic administrators. So again, this has been a very close partnership with our IT folks, Ray in particular, and I see Jeremy's already also in the room. So these are folks that are focused on our student success technologies as part of our IT group. And they're also just helping us coalesce a lot of this academic data, which might be from the Student Data Warehouse or Unizin or other things that we're creating, honestly, in the advising space. And Ray's going to kind of demo that for you. So we did build this using Unizin data and are now ready to tap into Student Data Warehouse. We chose to build the dashboards in Power BI, just simplicity, licenses, all those kinds of things. And then really it's representing this data equity step because we are giving everyone the same access to the same data and reports, and they all see the same information, whether it's for their students taking their classes, students wishing to change to their program. Everybody can see everything. It's not this kind of siloed off, I only see my own data kind of thing. Compass answered some questions, like I said, but advisors still had to remove between the report, the student system, a degree audit, some notes, and trying to understand what's happening with this individual student. So we already had really great reports. We don't have a reporting problem on our campus. The data was just a bit fragmented. So we're trying to coalesce it for the advising purpose. So then we were asking, how do we get together all this information? What are the requirements? We kind of know from our long relationship what the advising needs are. In some respects, that was a pretty straightforward part of the project is the requirements phase. And how do we get that coalesced into a single advising experience? So I'm not looking at all these other places. And how do we kind of break down those silos to get that consistent and shared workflow throughout our advising cycle, throughout our quarters, throughout our year, and with whatever's happening in each individual office. So an example of kind of how we had an initiative that we're working through, this is just an example of how we're applying this in the context here. And I mentioned my position is new. So prior to that, there wasn't any real central leadership role for advising standards or across the schools. I mean, they met, but I don't know to what extent they were able to agree or find consensus on things. So it gave us an opportunity to start looking at advising from this institutional perspective. I always have the 30,000 foot view and I'm looking over everything while everyone else really just understands their own wedge of our pie. And I say that because our campus is a circle. So rather than just through their individual lens. And one of the first things that I was tasked with looking at was our academic probation processes, or the lack of a shared process. So when we started, I was looking at 24 different categories of what people were calling probation. And so we met and we kind of reset and redefined what we meant by that on our campus. I started calling it academic recovery, again, because I didn't think we were going to change the actual word in the regulations, but the recovery is still what we consider our process. Notice is the status, recovery is the process. And we're trying to align that with these guiding principles that really were that there should be unambiguous criteria for what places a student on notice. Because right now, before we had like so many different categories that were school-based. And we also wanted to focus on the recovery, the student success, the regaining of your good academic standing, rather than some kind of punitive measure, which a lot of our processes felt that way. And we recognized that wasn't our intention and we needed to make a shift. So we developed the framework that you see here, where we have a lot of the things that schools were tracking are now either for their own progress monitoring to make sure students are on track in their major, but that's not notice. You're not putting somebody on notice because they couldn't get into a class one term. And then a lot of some of the other things we class as early alert. So, and some of those might be like the threshold of GPA that's just above what the academic notice threshold is, which is 2.0. That's pretty standard. And then other things that they might be looking at, like you didn't do this lower division class, or you didn't pass this or that. And some of that kind of blends with the notice and the progress monitoring, but trying to keep the categories separate for our advising units and having this shared process. Now we initially had a lot of people philosophically agreeing with this and our guiding principles, but the practical implementation, they were like, Heather, we can never do this. Like, how can I implement this? And we were able to spool up some reporting tools pretty quickly that kind of met that need. And those were in our previous ecosystem, and we transitioned them to the new Compass Insights. But alongside that, it's when I'm working with an individual student, again, the analytics can answer a question of who, but it's not really telling me what I should do next, what's going to work with this student. So the Compass Insights tells me who's on notice, but advisors need to know more about an individual student to support their recovery. And so I need to understand why are they struggling? I need to communicate with the student. I need to maybe coordinate with support resources. And what's going to work for this student is not going to be the same for another student. So I'm looking for that deep dive kind of understanding of that student's current progress. So that does bring us to our transition to creating an advising platform on our campus. So everything I've described so far is really about the sort of institutional culture and policy and structure and some of our advising initiatives. And Compass really showed us like this is what shared institutional data could look like. And so we've made some decisions along the way, and we decided that we were going to build the AnteaterAdvising. It emerged as our next step, not as another reporting tool, because we already have a pretty robust platform for that, but more of a comprehensive advising platform that brings together the different pieces of our institutional data, merges that with what advisors can kind of tell us, and supporting that day-to-day advising with the individual students. So now I'll let Ray tell you more about the technical side of all the stuff that we've done.
Cool. Thanks, Heather. The AnteaterAdvising itself started, I believe it was like a napkin sketch from our vice provost after he had a meeting with one of the advising directors, and it turned into essentially a giant wish list of all the data elements they wanted to see on one screen. I think there was like 50 different elements on there, ranging from their demographics to their academics to what's going on in Canvas, which is obviously where Unizin comes in to play with the data. So we ended up deciding to build a platform, AnteaterAdvising. I have a slide at the end about why we didn't go the buy route, because that's always an interesting question too. I do want to point out that a lot of the data from AnteaterAdvising is drawn from our student data warehouse. A lot's also drawn from Unizin. Our SCW is slightly more timely, so that's why we opted to go for that as our primary data source. But we could have actually ended up building the whole system, I'm pretty sure, out of our Unizin data, given how comprehensive that data store is. We just had that little timing issue on our side. So the tool itself was developed by our Office of Information Technology, which is the office I work in, by our Student Success Technologies team inside of our Student Academic Services division. You don't have to remember any of that. There's no quiz later on UCI's org chart, but I wanted to mention that. A couple of members of my team are actually here today. Jeremy Thacker's our assistant director, Mike Walton's our manager and lead dev, and Justin Camacho is our other developer and our Scrum leader and our student supervisor. So our whole team is here today. Just to I guess watch me and grade my performance. So AnteaterAdvising itself is built off of a slightly older platform we had called ScoreShare, which just drew in Canvas data and eventually Unizin data. That was our first kind of Unizin success story. I think a week after we finished our UDP implementation, ScoreShare had been switched over to use the UDP as its primary data source instead of Canvas data directly. So we had a really big early win due to our Unizin partnership. But AnteaterAdvising itself expands on that data a whole bunch, directly supporting many of Heather and Michael Denon, our vice pros for teaching and learning, many of their initiatives on campus. My goal eventually is for this tool to be every advisor's homepage. I would love if they all start their day here and start every appointment with it, and maybe even end their day with a little retrospective about how their day went. It's a little auspicious, but it's good to have big goals. If anybody's curious about learning more about the tool afterwards, you can always feel free to reach out to me or Heather, or you can learn more on our website, compass.uci.edu. Click on Anteater Advising up at the top. The key components, which I'm going to go through, I'm going to give you a run through of the whole system and talk about all the major features. I will try to be as concise as I can. The big five, and there's actually like seven because I added a couple slides on, but the main five are the student profile. That's that one sheet view of a student that pulls in data from multiple systems. This is the view that advisors simply didn't have before. To get this data, they would have had to open 4 or 5 different screens across multiple web applications, deal with logging in through Shibboleth and our Duo multi-factor on all of them and all that kind of super fun stuff that everybody loves to do to get access to data. But now we have it all on this one sheet. We also pull in a lot of Canvas analytics to contextualize what's going on in the quarter. We have a dynamic query tool to help advisors locate students. They can kind of hone in on those groups that they need to talk to. A way that advisors can custom tag groups of students, and we're building query tools around that to make those custom tags a little bit more flexible within the system, and diverse data feeds. So we're pulling in data from not just our data warehouse and actually have a slide for that. Not just our data warehouse and Unizin, but as you'll see in a future slide, we're also pulling in data from our Career Center and eventually other systems, which I'll get into when we look at our future features. So again, this is our very high-level data flow. Thanks to Google Gemini for generating this very AI-looking diagram with weirdly curvy arrows. But our main data flows into our student data warehouse, which then flows into UDP, which then flows out to our tools. Unizin is obviously a big time saver. I think anybody who's heard me talk has heard me hype Unizin plenty, and I'll continue to do so. Our SCW has also been a major factor in our success. The nice thing about having these sorts of unified data systems is my team is really small. We're 3 people, and we have a couple student workers who work seasonally for us, who do great work. But we're a small team, and these let us focus on delivering value to our campus and not wrangling the data. And when we do have to wrangle the data, we have great partners on both teams to help us deal with those issues so that we're able to focus on providing these solutions again, rather than playing with databases, which Unizin and our CW folks are much better at than we are. Not that we're bad at it. I don't want to diss my team on accident, but they're better at that part. So our student profile, this is a unified view of all the student data. We're continuing to expand it. This screenshot is actually slightly old. We have a couple of features that are about to launch or that have just launched that you'll see later on. This is a comprehensive display of what a student looks like. It pulls in data from our student data warehouse over here on the left side and over here down here in the middle. It pulls in data from Unizin to show an activity score and a class performance. This uses the daily course grade data marts. The screenshot I took was during summer because that's the time that I took the screenshot for some reason. And we didn't have Canvas data yet because our summer just started. It's one of the bad things about real-time data systems is we're a little bit beholden to our academic calendar. But we are pulling in this useful data. We'll also eventually be augmenting the analytics features to build them out even more. Our advisors are really keen on knowing when students logged into Canvas or access to course space, so we're adding that sort of information that is readily available to us through Unizin to that as well. We have a module here that pulls in data from our appointment system, which is a custom web app that was built by UC Davis and adopted by UC Irvine about 10 years ago. But we pull in data from that system to show that extra context as well. The other view that was unique, interestingly enough, was this view down here that shows current enrollments, future enrollments, past enrollments, course grades, the actual section students were enrolled in, and which of our general education requirements those courses satisfy, along with GPA information. I know the screenshot's small if you're not on a big monitor. This was the first time that advisors had access to all these key bits of data on one screen. And our registrar systems, which have all this data, that's our source of system of record for this data, they were across a few different views. So we were really excited to be able to pull all this together so advisors wouldn't have to hop between screens. This is one of the big wins. We do have a link to pull up the data in web admin if they need to jump into that system so they don't have to go do a query on that tool as well. So wherever we're not able to show data or we want to give access, we deep link as much as possible to those systems. So this can, again, serve as that advising homepage. On the Canvas Analytics side, advisors can click in on that previous screen to a Canvas Activity Performance tab. They can go course section by course section, and they get information on the activity score, so their current week plus the historic data that we pull in, so they can see how that's changed over time. They get access to the course performance using that data mart, as well as historic performance week over week, so they can see where, again, they're dipping or increasing it. They get a visualization of the current assignment scores, and then a table below that shows all the assignments. All the categories they're in, the special rules around them, so dropping, lowest two or whatever's in there, the weights, and then some context. We're only showing advisors in the score area the same data that students get when they log into Canvas. So if an instructor hasn't published an assignment or unmuted it or whatever Canvas's term today is for releasing assignments, posting maybe. If they haven't posted the score yet, advisors don't see it. They don't get extra view into it. This is a functional equivalent of a student printing off their grade sheet and handing it to an advisor, which some units used to do in the olden days of paper and printers.
Yeah, and I
So
think that's right there, Ray. If I could interject just a minute, this is where our academic recovery initiative is going to be able to really have some value in this information. Bart, this might be why advisors are asking for Unizin data, right? A lot of this is understanding how a student is doing in the middle of the term. Much of what advisors have to do is wait for the final grades, and then it's already too late, and then we're being a bit reactionary to like what's already happened, rather than trying to intervene or assist the student in the middle of a term. And in my previous campus where I used to work, we had midterm grade alerts, but we had to solicit those separately from instructors. And this way, I don't have to ask anybody. I can just see what they're already entering into the Canvas. And then I can see if a student that I'm working with that's on academic recovery is like, yeah, things are going great. And you're like, looks like you haven't logged into Canvas for about 3 weeks and this assignment is late. Are you sure everything's going okay? So you're getting this real-time information about what's happening during the term, and then it's not, already done and over with a final grade. We can make some recommendations, whether that's go get some tutoring, or maybe you should drop that class, or go talk to your instructor, all the things. But it's now here for each individual student for me to look at. And I don't have to create a whole separate system to collect midterm grade progress.
Yeah. Yeah, there's another bit of context here that we forgot to mention. UCI is a quarter-based system, so our terms are 10 weeks rather than 16, I think, in a semester system. So we have even fewer weeks, less time in which to carry out these interventions. So by the time a midterm happens, our quarter's halfway over, in a lot of cases, because they're typically around week 5. So having access to this data in a timely manner is really important for our campus. Quarters are just one of the things that the UC likes to do a little bit differently. So yeah, that's Canvas Analytics. We are looking at augmenting this. I have a screenshot later of what we're looking at adding into it. One of the downsides of this is if a student looks like they're doing okay in most things, but maybe there's a category that's particularly higher weight than another one, the visualizations don't make it clear exactly where they're standing in terms of points earned in certain types of assignments. So we're looking at changing these analytics, these displays of data up to make it a little bit more useful for handling those sorts of nuances. But we continue to augment this, as advisors use and as time goes on. The other reason we opted to not show things like unpublished or unposted assignments, things like that, show what students see, was honestly so that instructors would be more accepting of the system when they hear about it. The advisors aren't getting any more access than students are getting, which means that they're kind of still on that same level playing field. So that helped academic senate to accept. I don't know if they approved it formally, the system, when we presented it to them many years ago. That's the other reason we did that, was to keep all of our users happy. There are some challenges with this. Obviously, if an instructor isn't using Canvas grades, we can't show the gradebook. Lots of our instructors like to use GradeScope, and we can't get data out of that system, but we do encourage them to enable passback features, all that kind of stuff. But there are some challenges around that. The other feature, one of the other key features I mentioned, is our dynamic query tool. This is sort of like a reporting interface. So it has a series of filters that users can choose from, including name, major, campus-wide honor status, class standing, cumulative GPA. We've also added in previous term GPA. We're about to add in which tag a student belongs to, so some other features as we build this out. But these are ways to pull data out of SDW and eventually UDP when we add activity and performance indexes onto the query tool. And it's to really let advisors create up-to-date and updated lists of students. So some of our advising units use a caseload advising style where, advisor A is responsible for all students whose names are A through N, who are in one of their two majors. So they can kind of set up and customize this to match their business processes. Or if they want to spot all students who have a cumulative GPA below a 2.0, or everybody who has, maybe above a 2.0, but their term GPA was low. That's one of the prereqs for our early alert process. They're able to do that as well with this tool. And they can always save the query, come back later. Whenever they set up a query or a tag, which I'll show in a moment, those are always shared within the advising group. So there's nothing that's personal to a user in this system. It's all at the group level. So everybody in the group knows what's going on. They have access to the same queries and the same tags, and they can contribute to the system equally. Also means if somebody goes on vacation or if they're out sick, their peers can help to cover the workload for them or take on tasks on their behalf. So having that kind of communal work structure and permission system was really important as we develop this tool.
I think different than a report, though, I'm going to get a list of
Yep.
students that then I can work with each of the students on that list. And that could be my starting point. And I'm not just seeing who they are, I can click into their records.
Yeah, thank you. It's weird that I didn't mention that. So you can see down here we have the screenshot of that list of students. I've obfuscated the identifying information. So it shows right now their activity score, their cumulative GPA, name, ID number, major, level, and the last viewed. We're also tracking the last time anybody in the advising office has viewed the student, so you can tell which students have been recently viewed or maybe haven't been viewed at all. And then we have quick links to jump directly to the profile, the campus scores, or web admin, which is our registrar system. We'll be adding more columns onto here, probably eventually have them customize the columns, all that sort of stuff. But yeah, that's the main purpose of queries is, I have this question and the query helps you to answer the question. How many of my students are in honors and have a low GPA? How many are in this name range? Stuff like that. As a fun note, we had to make our name range really flexible because one of our units does it down to like 4 letters of the last name to split their student group up. So we implemented this in a thoughtful manner to best support our diverse advising needs. Tags I mentioned before, these are ways that, let's say I know, and as Heather likes to say, I know the answer. I have a list of students and I need to give them a category of some sort. Custom tags are the way to do that. Let's say that you run a report in Compass Insights to get all of your students on academic recovery or academic notice, excuse me. You can go in that system, download that list, and then upload it as a custom tag into AnteaterAdvising, and you have a list of all the students there. Eventually, we'll have a filter so you can look at the academic status directly. But right now, that's the way the two systems can interact with each other. Or maybe you have students who are on a certain scholarship track or who are doing study abroad or anything else that you might need to custom tag a student with. You're able to do so with this tool. You can also then download the tag data if you need to. You can download just an email list. That's one of the frequent actions that advisors need to take is just an email out to students. We don't have communications features in this system yet. Turns out that's really hard to do. And so we kind of keep pushing it off to be later. But we do let them download just the email address. We're also sensitive to the fact that this is all sensitive data. When we have download features, we want to make sure advisors aren't just storing lots of really sensitive data in bulk on their laptops and desktops. So we try to make it so they can download just what they need at any given time. I'm going to be sensitive to time, so I'm going to go a little bit faster through the rest of the slides. We have a new feature. So this is one of our unique to UCI features that I don't think would be in another advising system, called change of major interest. So this isn't, the student is not changing majors here. They merely mentioned to an advisor that they wanted to change majors. So let's say that I'm an advisor and I'm advising Nancy here. And in this example in the back, they're a history major, and they say, I kind of want to switch to math. I can go ahead and log that interest here. We can chat about their goal when they want to accomplish it by. I can take some notes. And now that information, the screenshot down here says physics. Let's pretend they change it to physics later. Now when they meet with any advisor, that advisor now knows that Nancy here wants to switch to the physics major. So if she goes and meets with a physics advisor or physical sciences advisor, they have that information. If she meets with one of her own current school advisors, they have that information as well. So that we can ensure consistent communication between the advisors and the students, regardless of what group they're in. They don't have to go parse through notes or other systems or an email between advisors or the student's recollection. They just have this data immediately available. We're looking at making some reporting views around this. You can see this in bulk. We also want to eventually provide this data to our student data warehouse. If it's used heavily enough, this could be a form of monitoring demand for majors. It could be used for enrollment projections, all sorts of interesting stuff if it's more widely used. There's a different process for actually doing the change of major through our registrar that has approvals and all that kind of stuff that I'm assuming any institution would have. This is merely to indicate that there's an interest in changing the major, so it can support more interesting conversations and more productive conversations with the student. Another feature that we are launching soon is our reminders feature. The reminders feature, here we go. Show the other screenshot. The reminders feature is a way that advisors can go in and remind themselves to do something in the future. So this is one of the things that Heather actually requested. Our physical sciences users also have had a similar request based on our analysis of their needs. But essentially what happens is, I'm meeting with a student and maybe I need to do something with their record later, increase their unit caps so they can enroll in more courses. But I can't do that until later on in the quarter. So the way some units do right now, maybe they'll take a sticky note, stick it on their monitor. Although for me, with lots of students, you can end up with hundreds of sticky notes. Maybe they have a shared spreadsheet that they use to assign the tasks between each other. Maybe they use a shared collaborative task system. There's all sorts of different ways that units can handle that. But if we bake it into the system, now all units have access to the same systems, the same underlying platform, so we get that equity piece in place. But it also means that, like, let's say I'm out and I needed to adjust the unit cap. Anybody else in the office can see that that adjustment needed to be made and take care of it and mark the reminder as complete. So this feature is almost done with our QA process. It's about to go out either in 2 days or in a week, depending on our finalization of our QA stuff. But this we're hoping will be a really useful feature in keeping advisors within the system and helping them to better manage and support these sorts of reminder type activities and these to-do lists.
That's
We offer a
a
bunch of
major thing in advising is like I tend to only, put out the fires that came across my threshold today. And then I'm talking to a student and I'm like, oh, we need to check back and do these 5 things. And then they leave your office and you're like, well, I hope everything's okay. So it's really hard to make sure that you have that capacity to follow up. Who am I supposed to follow up? Who is okay? And to give yourselves reminders that are flagged on the student's record is a really big, useful tool, just to be that more proactive, strategic advising and getting away from the sort of just more tactical, reactionary, what's happening today kind of advising.
And we also provide a view of the reminders at the group level. So you can, when you log in, you actually get a tab that says reminders that tells you how many reminders there are, how many are overdue. You can click that and see all the reminders that that are set for any student within your group. So you can access that information as well at that high level. So we offer multiple views of the data to support whichever way they want to go through and do it. If we just had it at the student level and nowhere else, advisors are handling, in some cases hundreds of students, depending on the ratio and the school they're in. So we want to make sure that they get those kind of high-level views so they can dig into the individual data as efficiently as possible. In the back end, we're also storing and tracking all of this data so we can eventually make logs around it and analyze the feature usage and all that kind of fun stuff. I mentioned data integrations before, everybody's favorite, a data diagram. So the solid parts of it are things that exist today. I already kind of described how we flow data from our SCW up to Unizin. The data marts, as always, and that Unizin creates are super useful for what the work we do. Whenever a new data mart is released, we always look at it and we try to figure out if we can use it in any of our tools. I'd like us to use 100% of data marts, maybe be the first campus to do so. Um, that's how we're using the data marts. In the future, we want to pull in data from other systems. So Handshake is our career center data. We're already pulling it in for Spark, which I gave a webinar on last year in October, I think. So you can go back to the Unizin YouTube channel and find that if you're interested. But Handshake's our career center software. So we're pulling in data there on if they have profiles, if they've done career fairs, things like that. We'll eventually expose that through AnteaterAdvising through a career pathways module. Campus Groups is our campus engagement platform. So all of our student organizations and events are tracked. We're going to pull in data here so we can tell. We don't necessarily want to know what club a student's in, but we do just want to know if they're engaged on campus. This is all part of building that holistic view of a student beyond just their academics. The more engaged students are with the campus, the more likely it is that we'll retain them and then eventually graduate them. So having this additional context around a student is really important. Right now, we're pulling it into our own local database. It would be really interesting in the future if Unizin is able to support these sorts of non-LMS data stores that are LMS-esque in terms of how much data is in them and how structured they are. So we'll hopefully we can discuss that. But in the meantime, we're storing it locally and transforming it into useful ways for us to use it. We also tap into our appointment system through an API that we developed, Spark. We're also going to be tapping into so we can show when students are engaged with that platform. And eventually, we want to send all the tags and the change of major interest back to our SDW so that that can be made available for analytics. And this virtuous cycle of data can continue, supported by systems like AnteaterAdvising. This is our big grand data vision. We're about 2/3 of the way there. And we're excited to continue releasing those features. I just mentioned this. It's just a little bit more detail about what we're looking at doing at the SDW. I already kind of described how we want to contribute data back, so I won't spend too much time on this slide. Another feature we're looking at developing, so we're moving into the more future-facing things, a holistic advising dashboard. So an advisor can log in. In this case, they are Samantha, who works in ICS undergrad advising. Samantha's my dog's name, so just plug in my pet here. When they log into this screen, the idea here is they can see what they need to do in this system at a glance. So their upcoming reminders from our appointment system, their upcoming appointments from our appointment system, their upcoming reminders from the reminders feature, and then any pin tags and queries and things that they said they care about will also show here. I think that showing a list of recently viewed students would be interesting. These are all fake names and fake students, so there's no real data on here. Chances are if they viewed a student recently, they probably want to view them again because either about to meet with them in the case of Priya here, or they're monitoring them for some other reason. And then some additional context, showing them just a reminder of how far through the quarter we are, although 10-week quarter, we're all pretty aware of where we are in the year. And also how fresh the data is. That's always important to advisors to know when the data was last updated. So this advising dashboard we'll be building out of the coming months, and this will eventually be the new homepage experience for our advisors. You can see it's also modular as we build up the system. We can also look at developing modules that really support their business practices. Another feature is leveraging, however, let's talk about AI. So we have an AI feature planned as is required by all modern web applications. We're looking at providing an AI case summary. This is really inspired by what we're seeing in the medical world with systems like Epic and our medical records. If anybody's gone to the doctor recently, you probably have had them ask if they can use an app on their phone to listen and take notes for them. Those are always AI apps. My doctor just asked for that the other day. She didn't say it was an AI app, which I thought was interesting, but when I grilled her a little more, she copped to it. The idea here is there's a lot of data on that profile, and we're adding even more data as time goes on. It's a lot of data for advisors to have to parse. We also have undergraduate students who act as peer academic advisors. Heather's background is actually the 50th anniversary of our peer academic advising program is this year. So congratulations on having that program continue. But the idea here is that we want to cut down the prep time for appointments. We're not looking to replace advisors. We're not looking to tell them what to do or how to think. But what we want to have is an objective summary of the student records. They can review this, maybe an objective summary of the student's strengths and areas of concern. The prompting that we'll be building around this will all be developed in partnership with advisors so that we can kind of maximize the potential here. It sounded so buzzwordy. And make this as useful as possible to them. We are cognizant of the ecological impact and the ethical concerns around artificial intelligence and Gen AI. So a couple of things that we do, we actually have a code of ethics our team has developed internally to guide our implementations here. We also recognize that all the data underneath this is, it's a day old, so we're not going to generate this on demand. We'll store the data and let them refresh it daily if they want to. We'll also have a button to regenerate it, and it'll be optional. If they don't want to use the AI feature, it'll be collapsed by default. They'll have to expand it to actually view it. So we're trying to be really sensitive and conscious about how we're implementing these AI features. But I think that at least the summary will be really useful. We've had really positive feedback, almost universally positive feedback when we shared this feature with our advisors. So we're looking forward to launching that. We're also planning on enabling some lightweight analytics features within the tool. So if you're inside of a tag, a custom tag, or a dynamic query, we want to let you at least view some summative data around what's going on with the students. So, how many are first gen or honors are on campus, how many have a low GPA. There's more to this screen. Unfortunately, it didn't load when I tried to do my screenshot yesterday because my development server wasn't working. We also want to show charts of their cumulative GPA over time, their term GPA, all sorts of interesting information that you might want to see for those cohorts of students that you're putting together. It's complementary to the Insights Power BI tool. It's not nearly as flexible. You don't get any filtering or sorting or anything like that. But at least we can give them a picture of what's going on in here so they don't have to download it and run those sorts of analytics in another tool. We're also looking at deeper UDP integration. So that'll take the form of two different views. On the student profile view, we want to surface more information and not just those boxes, which were great for summaries, but maybe obfuscate some of the more nuances that's going on there. We want to show per class data, the percent points they've earned, to highlight if there's any concerns or activity score the last time they logged in. So making this information more readily available to advisors. And when they access the course itself, we also want to show more analytics around point distribution within the different categories, how many points they've earned in each category, what's actually possible for students to do given the point in the quarter, and how many points they've earned, so that advisors can have that more focused conversation without having to draw all the data down and do a bunch of math and figure out where the student actually is. Not that advisors can't do math, but let's save them from that so they can focus on advising students around that. So this is all data that's in data marts and made available to us, and we're looking forward to augmenting that as well. So we've learned some valuable lessons along the way. One of which is that performance is really important in a system like this. Our initial versions, you could run the query, it would take upwards of, I think, 2 minutes to load the data. So now we really aggressively cache data from the SCW, and we're starting to cache data aggressively from UDP. The systems they're not like slow, but because we're using a web app and our tolerance for latency is very low, we found ourselves needing to do all that data caching. Because all the data is updated daily, we could cache once a day, and then advisors get all the data queried from that cache instead. It also lets us, in the case of upstream data issues, we have a good stable data source from the day before, so we can not refresh the cache if there's something going on with a network connection or a data load gone bad or anything like that. It's very rare, but it is nice to have that additional gateway in place. We also found that a lot of the development of AnteaterAdvising has actually gone shockingly smooth. Everything I showed today was developed in the last 12 months by our small team. A lot of that was because of smart decisions we made. So the system itself was primarily a Unizin system before we put the SDW data in, but joining everything together was really easy because all of our key identifiers were already loaded into Unizin. So I wish I could say that a key lesson was that we had to go do this great stuff that Unizin supported, but we'd already done it. So we were able to just immediately take advantage of that and focus on developing the tool. Also, providing data to advisors is important, but also these new features like reminders and change of major interest and the additional, other tools and features I talked about, the AI summary and things like that. Those are really important to advisors too. They have access to the data, but they still need to do their day-to-day jobs. They still need to advise students and track what's going on and, ensure that they get that holistic view of a student. So we've found that implementing these interesting features might be a little bit outside the original mission of giving data, but it's still making a better advising system. Advisors also really want to be able to message students and track notes better. So those are two areas that we're going to be focusing on in the future. We didn't buy a system. I think it might be clear by now why we didn't buy the system. It's very bespoke to UCI. We also had a team of developers ready and able to build it. We had buy-in from executive leadership to build an advising system for the first time in my career at UCI, which is approaching 25 years now. So we really want to take advantage of this momentum and this excitement to deliver the system to our campus users. It's also a lot easier to integrate our homegrown tools into that. We have decades of campus experience that we're tapping into across multiple institutions, as Heather mentioned. So we have all those reasons why we didn't buy the system. Very quickly, other data tools that we've built. So that was it for AnteaterAdvising. We built UCI Spark, our student dashboard, leveraging entirely Unizin data. Again, that webinar last year and our other presentations, we've talked about it. So feel free to review that or reach out to us. Again, lots of Canvas analytics are in here. We're increasing the amount of them, and over the summer, actually, we're revisiting and really revamping our analytics view here. Heather already talked about Compass Insights, our Power BI platform, and we're developing a tool for instructors to have access to similar analytics, but at their course level, including this new thriving student metric where they can actually see which students may need some support, which are on track. And eventually it would be nice if this system also communicated with AnteaterAdvising. So either an advisor could see that students that need support or an instructor could forward that off to them. And I rushed through all those slides because I realized it was 11:58. But that is it for our slide deck and our presentation. So if there's any time for questions, we're able to answer them. Otherwise, feel free to reach out. Email is the best way. I'm also on the Unizin Slack, although don't think I've logged in a week or two. So if you ask me questions there, I think it sends me an email so I can get back and answer anything on there. But otherwise, that is it for what we wanted to talk about today.
Great. Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Heather. We probably have time for one question if anyone has something they would like to ask. I don't think I see any in chat. You can unmute if you want to ask a question or put it in chat.
Should have had my team seed questions.
I will ask one.
Go ahead.
This is Maureen Schaefer from the University of Iowa. And for Heather, I'm interested from your perspective. Do your advisors have concerns about having access to their student data? That is an issue that we are having on our campus. You know, some advisors think more information is better than no information, and other advisors say it feels like not very ethical for me to have this information. Did advisors struggle with it is the question.
I mean, the short answer is no.
Okay.
I think we have a little bit of an egalitarian view, I guess, on this, like that we should just all know what is available to be known. And we all have our legitimate educational interest in this for protected data. And I need it in order to be able to effectively support the student. Now, I did work at another place for a long time before joining UCI 7 years ago. And we did have this like, well, you can't see my advising notes and they're mine. And, you know, you don't own the student, so you can't see that. And we don't have that sort of concern on our campus. I think just having access to the same level of information was more of our concern. As I mentioned, we had a bit of this haves have nots kind of thing. Like some school a dean had decided to throw some resources at this and build some little, you know, system within that school. And other people are like, hey, I need that too. Like I'm over here just like scratching things together and I need to know this because otherwise my students are just out there like trying to figure things out on their own, and that's not advising.
Yeah.
Right. There was another question in the chat. I don't know, did it disappear or did someone answer it?
I don't see one here.
It was Ross. There he is.
I had stuck something in there. I was just curious if you had like just anecdotal feedback about what advisors appreciate the most or use the most as part of this AnteaterAdvising.
Well, initially, it really is just that we have intentionally designed a comprehensive, conglomerated student profile for the purposes of advising. Because they consistently told us before, look, I'm spending too much time. Like I'm trying to find the information. I've got to assemble it together. I got to go to like 5 different places to find it. So just having everything in this single like source for advising And it's also the first system that we have had on campus that is dedicated to advising functionality. It's the first system that advisors have had the primary say in what it is and how it's built. I mentioned before, like, we're consumers of information. We're relying on systems that admissions built or the registrar built, but they're building those systems for their own functionality, their own operations. And so when I need something, they're like, yeah, I don't know. Or they have a major upgrade and then they're like, here, I already did it. How do you like it? And you're like, oh, you just took away 6 critical functions for me. Can I get them back? Like, so they're really just excited that it's not a system being imposed on them, and that it's a system that they have had a say in, and that the tools are really built for the advising function, and that it's ours. Like, that's what they're most excited about. But the system is pretty new. Ray mentioned that we ramped this up in the past year, and we launched it around
Early
January.
April.
Yeah. What was that, Ray? When was
Early
it?
April was the formal launch,
Yeah,
but we
yeah, yeah.
started
So,
releasing the features a little
yeah,
earlier.
so we had been talking with everyone about it and having some, some of our folks kind of kick the tires on it. And then we did sort of an informal training at the end of April. So, but the academic recovery is probably my best example. Advisors working with those students that are struggling and trying to get them back on track, they're like, wow, now I can see everything that's been going on. I don't have to look at what you enrolled over here and then what your grade was over there and then what you're doing next and what the trajectory was. Like, I can see it all on this intentionally designed comprehensive student profile. And then we're building out these other feature requests. If I'm working with a student on academic recovery, I'm probably not going to be like, hey, just see me during enrollment time. I want to see you a couple times during the quarter. And as Ray mentioned, quarters are really quick. They're a little brutal sometimes, actually. You miss a little and then you're kind of sunk sometimes. And so we're like, okay, what is the class? What is the class you're struggling in? What are the options for support in that? How do I move forward and help you with that? And I can see exactly what's going on in this, semi-real time loaded once daily. But before, I would have to go to ScoreShare to see it. And then I would have to match that up with web admin, which is our very our very directly named thing. We only know how to name things 2 ways on our campus. The system is what it does. Web admin is our administration on the web, or it's some cheesy Zot reference, because we are the anteaters and anteaters Zot. This is an anteater. But yeah, the advisors are just now kind of getting into it. Ray and I, after that larger sort of informal training, we've been going around department to department and kind of saying, what questions do you have? What goes on in your advising cycle? Here's how you can answer those questions, both with our Compass Insight reports and the analytics there, but also then how are you working with individual students in AnteaterAdvising and tagging them and identifying them? I'm actually going to have a series of meetings with our campus-wide honors because they've had their own access database for I don't even know how long. Jeremy might know, that we're trying to wean them off of. And we're like, well, help us understand all the different functionalities that access database, because they got a lot of tags in there that they don't even use anymore and things like that. But how are we going to transition you over to AnteaterAdvising and our Compass Insights Power BI analytics? But people are just excited to have access to data that is the same and everybody has the same access. And then now we are working on more of the implementation cycle where we are working at like, okay, when you need to do this function, you're going to go to this report and then you can run this list in the AnteaterAdvising. And then when you get that list and you're in a record, you can just go next person on the list, next person on the list, next person. And you could just flow through that list and work with the individual students once you've identified them using the other tools.
Thank you.
I may have more outcomes later. It's early days yet.
Maybe we'll revisit this in 12 or 16 months, see where it's at. Okay, well, thank you everyone for staying a little later. Thank you again, Heather and Ray. We will have this recording probably posted on our YouTube channel here within the week. And we'll send out an email to everyone that registered once that's there. Thank you, everyone. Hope you have a good 4th of July.
Thank you, Art. Thanks, everybody.